All right, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
So ready for rapid fire. I have been looking forward to this all day long.
All week long. Like it's
Well,
been a while.
that's a good point. It's been a while,
I
and
know.
I'm fired up. I'm
We're
fired
2
up
days
for it.
away. 2 days away from the start of training camp. So, I
Say
mean,
it ain't so.
you want to get fired up. What's the biggest question you've got heading into Wednesday's start of Notre
Oh,
Dame fall training camp?
so many directions. So many directions, Sean Stiers, to go with this particular question. I think at this point, because look, obviously we have dissected and analyzed and gone over just about every storyline, I would think.
Ad nauseum.
Yes, because it's what we do. It's part of the gig, right?
That's
And
why I'm glad
so,
it's almost actually here
ugh.
now.
Well, the
So,
problem is we're not going to get any new storylines because we don't get to see anything, but that's a different conversation.
yes.
Um, I think the biggest question I have, I'm going to boil it all down. What happens with the offensive line?
Okay.
Who is going to end up start? I've heard a lot of things about the right tackle position and, the top two guys that are duking it out for that. It sounds like there could be an upset here. The left guard position, how does Joe Rudolph, how does he end up going about it? Is he going to go with the good old safe pick, or does he go with the ceiling pick?
Upside. Yeah.
The upside pick where, if you're grading it on like 10 plays, that 8 plays could be amazing, but you might get 2 whiffs, or you get 10 plays of, well, he went to the right guy. You know what I mean? Like, what is important? What do you want to do? And I think the answers to those questions on the offensive line will go a long way to telling us how good this team could be.
I mean, I think that is like the single biggest storyline probably heading into fall training camp. What's going to happen at those two spots?
Yeah.
Like when you look at the left guard with Coogan and Spindler, I mean, one way or another, you've got a guy who was a starter at the
Sure.
start of last season who's going to be disappointed. That both
Yeah.
of them can't end up out there, assuming Schrouth is going to be the right guard, which I think we pretty much all
Agreed.
do. And like things that we're hearing kind of tend to point in that direction as well. But those are arguably the two biggest spots up for grabs going into training camp. There's no doubt about it. The left guard and the right tackle.
And we will see none of that on Wednesday. I mean,
Unfortunately.
outside of who lines up where on the first day, which will give us something to talk about, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
they're not wearing pads, Sean. You're not going to see anything outside. Like, anytime we go to the first practice of the season, it's like, okay, who's lining up with the ones? Who's lining up with the twos? That
Mhm.
kind of thing. But at the end of the day, look, there's a good chance, like, for example, Don Schuler is going to line up as the starter at safety.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Because that's where he was pretty much next
When-
to Xavier Watts when the spring ended, because Rod Hurd
Absolutely.
wasn't practicing here. So
100%. So anytime, you've got a new guy or whatever, they're not going to start on day one. It's just kind of how it always works. You know what I mean? And so whoever the incumbent or the upperclassman is probably going to get the nod on day one, that kind of a thing. And so let's say there was a ton of movement at quarterback over the summer. I don't know if there was. I have no idea. Let's say there's a ton of movement. It won't matter. Steve Angeli is going to get the 2 reps. Minchie's going to get the 3 reps. CJ Carr is going to get the 4 reps. Period. You know what I mean? So that's the tough part.
And if they mix those reps up, it's likely going to come long. When we get those 5-period practices, it'll be in period 7, 8, 9, or
100%.
whatever it happens to be.
Let's say they run CJ Carr out with the 2s on Wednesday, right?
Uh-huh.
They might as well just just throw a bomb over in the media, because the place will explode.
Well, see, and this is actually kind of where I'm going with my answer to this question. It's not as much regarding CJ Carr, but I guess my question is, are we going to get this artificial Riley Leonard versus Steve Angeli quarterback competition to start camp like we've started the last few camps, going back to Jack Cohn in 2021?
Right.
like with Drew Pine and all that different stuff. Are we going to have some of these guys out there who are watching these practices and doing the measuring stick of every throw that we see and actually, making these comparisons? Are
Yeah.
we going to get those questions at the start of camp? Because when spring ended, Riley Leonard wasn't healthy,
Yeah.
obviously, and Steve Angeli was the de facto number one quarterback. So I guess that's my question, because there were some of those questions toward the end of spring.
Yeah.
How long are you going to go till you name a starter? Like, are we going to get that artificial storyline going into training camp? That's, maybe I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm wondering, are we actually going to get that at the start of this camp?
For your sake, I hope not, because you're the one that has to write the stories about these things, and I really hope that you don't have to write that artificial story.
Spend time, yeah.
Look, Marcus Freeman can just put that whole thing to rest and be like, okay, guys, breaking news here. Riley Leonard is our starter. After Riley Leonard, it's a competition.
Right.
That's reality, right? I mean, everybody and their brother knows that Riley Leonard is a starter on this football team, and it's not close. It's not close. And so just put it to bed, man. Don't be like, it's a competition like that. Like, can you even, if you're Marcus Freeman, can you even say that with a straight face?
That's yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing if that's the narrative that they're pushing? I would have a problem with that, just from a, guys, there's other actual storylines that we can report on and talk about. Why don't push that one? Because that's not a storyline. It's not real.
Well, and we're going to get Mike Denbrock on day 2 as well. We're going to get to talk to the offensive coordinator on day 2. Day 1, Marcus Freeman holds his regular press conference after we watch a full practice. And then day 2, we get to watch the 5 periods that morning, and then we leave, but then we come back and we're going to get Mike Denbrock right away. So
Mike Denbrock's a pretty honest guy.
Yeah.
I would like to think. So that'll be interesting, because the majority of the conversation is going to be around the quarterback position,
right,
with Mike.
There was a story, I think it was middle of last week, basically, that came out saying Riley Leonard says he's healthy and all, 100% healthy and all those different things. And if that's the case, I mean, that's the only question, I think, as far as most of us are concerned with Riley Leonard, is just how healthy is he? And we'll obviously have an eye on that, seeing exactly what he looks like, because the last time we saw him, he was still walking around in the ankle brace and doing all those different things, like the closest he looked was at the Blue Gold game when I think he was so itching to get out there. He was wearing the uniform. He obviously wasn't going to play in that thing, but yeah, like, how's Riley Leonard moving, all those different things. But I just hope we don't get the half-baked, there's a quarterback competition going on here at the top.
Yeah, so. No doubt.
So you won't be able to be there on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So what's the number one thing that you want me to watch for you when we go out there? Yeah, I mean, it can be what we just talked about if you want.
Well,
but like, if you have something different, like, I'm right away.
Yes.
Where would VD's eyes be going if you were out there?
Ill-timed family vacation. It
happens
from a work standpoint.
I think mine was at the start of camp last year, if I remember.
Yeah, it was.
Right, so
it was, but it's ill-timed for work, but it's perfectly timed for everybody else in my family. So it is what it is. You know what I mean? With high school sports, I got 2 high school sports kids now, and like trying to manage those schedules and everything. So, I mean, it is what it is. But here's the deal. You have to understand the structure of the practice, right? The structure of the practice is it's helmets, and that's it. Right. I mean, it's not like a nudist colony. You got
basically jerseys and shorts.
It's jerseys and shorts and helmets.
No pads.
Yeah, no pads. Sometimes they have like those interesting, like, little plasticky type protection on their shoulders, but there's no shoulder pads, right? And so what can you glean from that type of a practice, right? Outside of who lines up with the 1s and 2s and 3s, what can you glean? Can't glean anything from offensive line, defensive line. Can't really glean much from running backs and linebackers, okay? Because I want to see if those guys can hit and take a hit and that kind of thing.
Right.
So you're stuck with the secondary, wide receivers, receiving tight ends, and quarterbacks. You might be able to get a little bit of an evaluation out of those groups. And so with that being the case, It's the quarterback position because, look, it's not going to be live. So what Steve Angeli's worst quality, quote unquote, would be some of his decision making and how long it takes him to make a decision, and you're not going to be able to see much of that, right? It's going to be, how does the ball look when it comes out of his hand, and all the other guys as well. Is the timing with the receivers good? That would be a Riley Leonard question.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. And I think basically when I talk to you on Wednesday via text, which is going to happen, be like, hey, how did the quarterbacks look? That's going to be the question. That's going to be the legit question. How do the quarterbacks look? You know what I mean? Because, even just watching the quarterbacks warm up, you can see, okay, how does the ball come out of their hand? All of those different things. So I want to see the relationship with their pass catchers. I want to see, I know what it's going to be, but who comes out with the second team, who comes out with the third team, that kind of stuff. And does it look like 2, 3, and 4 are getting fairly equal reps, right? Because that. First of all, that's really hard to do, to give 4 guys equal reps.
Yeah.
That's really hard. So what does that look like? So it's all quarterback based for me when I talk to you. It's going to be all quarterback based.
And I don't blame you. I think that's, because of, like you said, the way practice is structured, once they're done with the stretching and all that different kind of stuff, that's what they'll do is the quarterbacks will be out there and they'll start throwing, likely to wide receivers against air, whether they start with that 4 quarterback drill where all 4 of them are throwing to different guys at the same time, or whether they just start with some lighter. So whatever it happens to be, that's just naturally
right.
We're all going to want to see it because, again, like going back to Riley Leonard and his health for starters. But then the other things, like you were talking about, how's the ball come out of the hands, and how do you compare what, especially those other what does Riley Leonard look like versus Steve Angeli versus Kenny Minchie versus CJ Carr? Just the simple things.
And that's going to be a good barometer as well, right? Because look, Riley Leonard's a starter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does he look like, if you just went in there and you just crawled out from under a rock from the past, 9 months, does Riley Leonard look like a starter? You know what I mean? Does he have the most zip on his ball? Does he carry himself like the starter? Is he walking with a limp? All of those different things. I don't think he will. I think he is probably 100%. I haven't, we've seen enough video of him walking around and doing some different things. I don't think that will be the case, especially in a practice setting like this, because it's not going to be highly, physical on his lower half. I mean, but it was his right ankle, right?
It's going to be basically the stuff that he's been doing all summer, throwing
Absolutely,
to wide
100%.
receivers, throwing the football around.
But look, you've watched enough football to know. I believe it was his right ankle. That's his plant foot. That's the one he's pushing off of. And you're going to be able to tell: is the ball sailing? Is the ball drifting? What does that look like? So even if you don't see a limp, you're going to be able to tell: is that ankle 100%?
Yeah. What kind of drive does he have? Yep.
Exactly.
But then, like you said, the timing as well, since he didn't get to throw with these guys, especially the new guy, the new guys, the guys who are all like, he was new to this team, but when you add Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison into the mix as well. Now, again, he's been working with those guys this summer because that's the biggest thing that you get to do as when there aren't official practices going on, those workouts that they do, the conditioning doesn't last all day.
Right.
You do some of that, but then as the quarterback, you get those guys out there, and I'm sure that he's been, leading some pretty healthy drills all summer long.
Absolutely. And, we haven't seen Bo Collins before. How does he look catching the football? And, just all of those bits and pieces and parts.
That's what I've been brushing up. I've been trying to brush up over the last couple of days on the numbers.
That's the hardest part, dude.
Bo Collins, number 5, by the way.
You better make sure that you get yourself a roster.
I know.
Because with all the new numbers, and we know the new numbers, but seeing them is going to be different. And, especially, I know that's not the case for you, but it is for me. I've been playing college football. I've been playing with Notre Dame on and off. Their numbers are all wrong on the game. And so, like, I've gotten used to
What I
seeing,
hear.
Great House with 19,
That's
and I
true.
think
So now you're on. Yeah. Now you got
Bo
to get
Collins
used
is
to seeing them.
5,
Uh-huh.
and no, it was Faison is 5. He's actually 6. Bo Collins is actually 5, but I think they have him in 1. So it's like,
Yeah.
I gotta
And Great House is 1 now. They've got him, with his old 19 and that whole thing. So.
exactly. So it's
Mhm.
all jacked up, and I need to get on board.
I bet that throws a lot of people off out there, like
It
thinking,
will.
who they think they're seeing and stuff like that for anyone who's been playing that thing.
There's no doubt about it.
All right, fill in the blank. The Notre Dame player we're not hyping enough right now is blank.
I had to sit and think about this one for a little bit because
I actually did too.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different routes you could go. Here's where I'm going to go. I'm going to get on. I don't know if it's the petty train or not, but I'm going with Drake Bowen, the forgotten middle linebacker, because of KVA. Everybody seems to think
it's actually a good answer because
it's like
I think from the fan base, especially, because my thought was like, are we not actually hyping KVA enough because everyone else seems to be on that hype shit?
Sure,
like us.
I get that.
But Drake Bowen, I think, is probably a great answer because everyone seems to want KVA. Like Drake Bowen has been discarded already, and the guy is just moving into a potential starting spot.
Yes. I mean, he hasn't even taken a snap as a starter, and he's already yesterday's news.
Yeah.
Like, if that doesn't tell you how crazy the recruiting game is, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, shiny new toy, and he flashed in the spring. So, all these true freshmen should be playing because they flashed in the spring, or they've got a high star rating or whatever. These other guys had a pretty good star rating too, and they've been here for a little bit, very little. He's a sophomore, right? Mm-hmm. So, but he had a whole year under JD Bertrand, for example, from a mental standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, from all of those different things. He's been in Al Golden's defense for a couple of years now. Like, all of the different things. We're all so excited about who Drake Bowen was and what he could be. And now, yesterday's news, baby. Put him out with the trash. It's Wednesday morning. Get him out of here. Put in the true freshman with all the upside. Like, come on, man. Give this kid a break. Give him a shot.
Again, I like that because it does feel like that there's much more hype on Kingston Viliamu-Asa than there is Drake Bowen. And, Drake Bowen was a guy who a year ago, everyone wanted to see more of him. But
right, exactly.
He's almost yesterday's news, and he hasn't even, the next season hasn't even started yet.
Unbelievable. And look, KVA is a really good player. I want to be clear on that. He's a really good player, but he's also a true freshman. So he's going to make true freshman mistakes. Okay. And he's going to be a valuable piece to this defense. He is, but probably on a rotational, sub-type basis, his first year on campus. All right. You're going to have plenty of years of KVA, probably, and Drake Bowen together on the football field. This just isn't that year yet. I don't think. Maybe crazier things happen. I don't know.
I wanted to say one of the Rovers, Snead or Osbury, on this, but there's just, there was so much hype on Osbury coming out of the spring because they started moving him around as doing different stuff. Is that going to continue? Was that a spring experimentation? Because that's something that happens as well, is you have more leeway to do that kind of stuff in the spring, but it doesn't necessarily always translate to what happens once fall camp starts. So I kind of stayed away from those guys. I'm going with Jason Onye because I feel like, now again, there's been, at least at times over the last couple of springs, a certain amount of hype on him, but I feel like watching him this past spring, things were definitely, like when you use that C word, consistency, right. I feel like things were starting to come together for him much more consistently. And again, like, he's not going to surpass a Riley Mills, for example, as the starter at that 3 technique, but he's got a chance to play alongside Riley Mills where like Howard Cross comes off the field in some of those third down situations and stuff like that. And Again, how much of that we truly get to see during fall camp is TBD, just because
Yeah.
of the way these opportunities present themselves. But I just have a feeling that by the time fall camp is over, he could really be ascending coming out of it when all is said and done.
That's a really good one because I think he was a little bit of the flavor of the week last year going into
Yeah,
the season. You know what I mean? Because
exactly.
some cameras caught him, chirping and all these different
Right.
things, and he kind of flashed at practice and stuff, and then the substance wasn't really there on a consistent basis. Maybe, whether it was from playing time or whatever, wasn't really there during the season. And I agree with you. He started coming on a little bit towards the end, and so he's going to be a much more important piece this year than he was last year. Like the initial hype, I think, was a year early with him,
Right.
or at least that's
Right.
the way it turned out. You know what I mean? And so, well, he was last year, so we're not going to talk about him this year. And so we're not really talking about him a whole lot. The Boubacar Traore is the new Jason Onye as far as like
Exactly, because he
hype.
got out there in the spring game and
Right.
made a couple plays in the spring game, which is great. I mean, it's what
Sure.
supposed to make plays if you can.
And he's
but
long and athletic and all of those
Mhm.
things, and he has a chance to be really good too.
If
I'm just
Jordan
afraid.
Botelho doesn't step up right away, all we're going to be hearing is, why isn't Boubacar playing out there
Absolutely.
more? Because of what people
Absolutely.
saw in the spring,
Right.
So that's just kind of the
But
way that goes.
Telho, that's going to be a whole other conversation. Like that,
Right.
his like where he ends up from like floor to ceiling is such a huge range right now, and where he's going to be. I have no idea. It's like, okay, shoot. Like, I have no idea what he's going to end up being. Because, like, again, I keep referencing the stupid video game, but like, he's a freaking All-American on that thing. Like, he is just destroying offensive lines. Does he have the athletic ability and the length to do that? Yeah, he sure does. But we have yet to see that on a consistent
Still haven't
basis.
seen it consistently.
Yep.
Yeah. It's now or never now.
Yes, it is. He's
This
a heck
is
of a bowl game player. They just keep him on ice until the bowl game.
That's
bowl
right.
season.
Exactly. Just roll him out there
right.
for the bowl game. Okay, so Penn State head coach James Franklin was asked if his team could be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams during Big Ten Media Days last week. He had an interesting response. I don't know if you've seen or heard any of this.
Nope, this is all fresh.
I was gone for a few days, so here we go. Here's Penn State head coach James Franklin.
Obviously, a lot of people have kind of made that statement and talked about that statistic or that data, and that's great. For us, it's what do we do to put Penn State this year in the best position to make the playoffs, but then not just make the playoffs, put ourselves in an advantageous position in the playoffs. How do we put ourselves in a position to have an opening week bye? It's amazing. I've seen so many things about Notre Dame not having a bye as part of their requirements with the playoff. They do have a bye. They don't have a conference championship game. That's their bye. How do we get ourselves in a position to have a bye? If not a bye, how do we put ourselves in the best position to have a home game in Beaver Stadium, which would be an advantageous position with those elements at that time of the year. So that's our focus. How do we get into the playoffs? And then not only that, how do we put ourselves in the most advantageous position so we can make a run, and a run that could be up to 17 games? I think one of the interesting things that is a challenge with the college football playoff model is, in some ways, if you play in the Big Ten championship game and you lose the Big Ten championship game, that is a more challenging situation than not playing in the playoffs, not playing in the championship game and making the playoffs. And I don't know if that is ideal, but the reality is the conferences are making too much money from the conference championship game, and they're not going to give them up. But that's one of the things that's a little bit of a challenge and a curveball for the way the system is currently set up.
Didn't take long, Vince. There you go. James Franklin, Penn State head coach. What dropping a little Notre Dame in there. What'd you think about that?
I have to say, and it is a little biting coming out of my mouth. I agree with literally everything that he said. Everything he said, he was on the money. And even the last part about the conference championship game being a detriment to the team that actually loses that game. He is absolutely right. Now, I think the college football playoff committee is going to give some credit to those teams, you know what I mean, that lose the conference championship game, unless they backed in, right? Like we've seen sometimes, back when they had divisions, you know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing. It will be curious to see, especially depending on who wins and loses those games.
100%.
And like if it's an upset, for example, and we kind of touched on some of that last week, or, if it is a team with at least 2 losses, like how far do they fall now that they've got a third loss?
Exactly. So
those kind of things.
That will be very interesting to see. And I totally agree with him that they can be a negative for the team that doesn't win, but you got to be in the game to win the game. And he talked about getting a bye and all that stuff. So it's like, you're darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of a situation. So I totally get that part of his argument. And can we disagree with the fact that Notre Dame gets a bye by not playing in a conference championship game? Like, that's what we've been trying to preach to people. Oh, we can only get the 5 seed and we can't get a bye. No, you get a bye. You automatically get a bye by not playing in the conference championship game. James Franklin's 100% correct. I mean, he's 100% accurate on that.
It's amazing to me because all it took was Marcus Freeman going on a couple of ESPN shows.
I didn't hear anything he said.
And giving that perspective, because that's what he was talking about when he was doing those ESPN shows.
That makes more sense.
The college football playoff kept coming up. So Marcus Freeman gave that response. It's like, well, we have a bye. We don't have to play in week 13, which is conference championship game. And so now all these other coaches in these conferences hear that. And they're like, well, Notre Dame's got a bye. They've got an advantage, So everyone's trying to spin this now to the great advantage that Notre Dame has, even though they don't get a first round playoff bye, all these coaches are already working it to like, this great advantage that Notre Dame is getting.
I mean, they're not wrong, which is why I was totally fine with them not being a 1 through 4 seed. You know what I mean? But it's hilarious that it took them this long to figure it out.
I know.
Because and why would they? Because they're not going to pay attention to what Notre Dame is doing in a at the time mythical 14-team playoff or 12-team playoff or you know what I mean? Like they haven't had to live it yet. And when you're a coach, you got to live in the now. I mean, you've got to worry about your own team and recruiting and all the blah, 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 blah. But it's funny. I didn't realize what Marcus Freeman had talked about on his little, road trip over to New York. And so now that you tell me that is 100% hilarious that now that's coming up in media days for other conferences. Like that is pricelessly hilarious to me. So that's
exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly. Like unprovoked. Here it comes.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Notre Dame's got an advantage.
Right in the middle of his tirade, that was not tirade, but whatever his soapbox speech. That's great.
Like you said, he is completely right about. The conference championship game is a money grab, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these teams, like these first few years of the playoff, how teams who are playing in those conference championship games, how they are affected when it comes to seeding, and I think that ultimately that's going to determine whether or not some of these conference championship games continue, whether or not these conferences are adversely affected by that, the team that loses those championship games and what their seeding ends up being. Because just to kind of reiterate to people, since we haven't been through this yet, the 4 buys, the 4 first round playoff buys go to the 4 highest ranked conference champions. So like, for example, if let's say Alabama is the number 1 seed in the SEC and they end up losing their conference championship game to Georgia, Ole Miss, whoever it happens to be. Well, obviously going into conference championship weekend, they stood to get a, like a first round bye. So now if they lose that game, they're not going to get a bye. How far do they also fall in the seeding? Again, like how long these conference championship games last, I think is ultimately gonna really depend on how things shake out the first few years of the playoff.
Very much so. It's something to keep an eye on for sure. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
So, speaking of things that coaches say, a couple years ago, Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney complained that the ACC network doesn't have its own version of Paul Finebaum, who, of course, does his show on the SEC network. It is simulcast on the SEC network. And beyond just that, they don't have their version of a Paul Finebaum who can essentially be a national voice for football programs in the ACC, the way Finebaum is for the SEC. And that topic came up again last week when all the schools were gathered in Charlotte, North Carolina for ACC Media Days. A lot of ACC coaches think that a Finebaum-like voice could have helped Florida State, for example, when they were snubbed from the playoffs last year, despite being 13-0. New Boston College head coach Bill O'Brien had this to say about the subject. Quote, "I wouldn't say Paul is a nice guy. I've been on the wrong end of Paul's commentary before, but that's what makes him who he is. He's not afraid to criticize. He's not afraid to praise when it's due. That's what the ACC needs. We don't need a guy or a woman who is going to praise us all the time. We need somebody like Paul who stirs the pot," end quote. So do you buy or sell, Vince, an ACC version of Paul Finebaum?
Well, I sell it on the topic of if you had somebody like that, then Florida State makes it into the playoff. Because I would like to think that the playoff committee has a little bit more integrity than just like watching Wake Up, on ESPN in the morning and getting all of their opinions from that. Or Get Up, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I have a hard time thinking that would have made a difference. Now, if you have somebody that is like that, and maybe that's more entertaining for people, but I just don't think, in my opinion, and maybe I'm naive, maybe that's definitely possible, I just don't feel like it's going to have the impact that these coaches are saying that it's going to have. The ACC has a network. They have the ACC network, right? Don't they have that two-guy show?
Well, they used to, the Packer and Durham.
Yeah, that one.
They don't have that. But they did away with that show over a year ago, I think,
okay,
because apparently not enough people were paying attention to it.
Look, Paul Finebaum has a following and he has a footprint in SEC country, and then everybody else hates him. And so that has propped him up, it's a lot of like Stephen A. Smith, for example. He's either love him or you hate him, and that's why he has a following. The ACC is not a conference that you love or you hate. They're just kind of there. And sometimes they got good teams. Sometimes they got bad teams. Sometimes they got both. And you don't love or hate the ACC. You just don't. They're not as polarizing as the SEC. They're just not. If Paul Finebaum grew up in New Jersey, we wouldn't have the following that he does.
If the teams in the competition overall, if there was more depth in the ACC consistently, you would have it. And it wouldn't matter if Paul Finebaum or anyone else. It's not like Paul Finebaum only beats the drum or only criticizes SEC teams. I mean, there's enough. He spreads it around.
He definitely does.
Like we played, I think you were gone last week, or you were gone for part of the week. I think it was when you were gone, Jesse and I played when Lane Kiffin was actually on the Paul Finebaum show, and Kiffin brought up when Finebaum was, criticizing him back when Kiffin was the head coach at USC, saying they need to fire the guy on the tarmac. And guess what? He got fired on the tarmac, but Kiffin was also indirectly, thanking him for the indirect path that, kind of helped
him to where he is.
He ended up working for Nick Saban for a couple of years, and
that's huge.
It got his career restarted. But Paul Finebaum is a one of one, though, because when you look at it, look at who else is on game day. It's former coaches and former players. Paul Finebaum in the media landscape is the only former non-player whose voice has the kind of prominence that he has, so again, ACC Network tried something like this, but Mark Packer and Wes Durham's voices just aren't the same stature of Paul Finebaum's. If they were, so I don't think that it's, I understand what they're saying, they feel like they need a cheerleader. But that's, and even a critical voice, which Finebaum is, but I don't think that it's going to get them what they think it would get them. The bottom line is the
Right.
ACC just needs to be better from top to bottom. Like Clemson was Clemson for, whatever that stretch was when they were winning their 2 national championships, and there really wasn't a number 2. Florida State is better now. Is it going to be them and Clemson for a while to kind of carry the weight for the ACC, or is it just going to be one of them, or is one of them going to be average? I mean, that's the bottom line. If your conference is better, you'll get more playoff bids, and you won't need someone in the media beating the drum for you.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Look, what's the biggest storyline coming out of the ACC right now, Sean? It's that 2 teams won out. Like, that's not going to do you any favors. And it doesn't matter who's trumpeting, the positivity or the negativity or whatever. Like, is that really what you want right now? I don't think it is.
And they want, like Florida State, I think getting left out of the playoff is kind of a tipping point for them. And obviously, if Florida State was 13-0 in the SEC, I think that they would have, kind of been viewed differently, regardless of who their quarterback was. But they weren't 13-0 in the SEC. They're 13-0 in the ACC.
Exactly.
And if they would have been in the SEC last year, they wouldn't have been 13-0. They would have been a good team, but they just wouldn't have held up the same. So, like the bottom line for them is they, like everyone, they want the money. They're not getting more money. They want out.
Yep.
So North Carolina head coach Mack Brown is 72 years old, which makes him the oldest football coach in the entire football subdivision. Here's a quote from Brown from last week. Quote, "Every coach recruiting against us says I'm going to quit, and 6 of them have been fired that said that already. So they ought to be worried about themselves." End quote. Rate that Mack Brown comment on a scale of 1 to 10, Vince.
That's like a 12. I love it, man. He is not afraid to speak his mind. Like, I've always been a Mack Brown fan as far as, who he is and what he's been able to do as a coach and all of those things. I mean, look, he guest starred on Friday Night Lights, Sean Steyer. That's all you need to know.
That's right.
You need to know.
That's right.
And that was a long time ago, by the way.
It was when he was still coaching in Austin. Yeah,
because
they filmed down there.
And so, I like Mack Brown. I don't think he's afraid to speak his mind, which I love. And he came right at it. I feel like he's got a list. I feel like he's got a list of people that are negatively recruiting against him by age, using age.
Checking the boxes.
He's checking them off. He's like,
he knows.
Yep. It's like what was it, Happy Gilmore, where the guy is like has the death list and he's just crossing off names. Like, I just feel like he's crossing names off of his list, and he knew that number when he was asked that question. Like, that was right here on the front of his brain. Like, he knew that number, and he probably could have told you the 6 names as well.
He's taking names. He's making a list that he's checking it twice.
I love it, man.
I love it. And, look, I don't know who, the negative recruiters are. There's some that you can probably guess, but I hate that kind of stuff.
Me too.
It's just recruit to who you are. You shouldn't have to be taking shots at somebody else. Mack Brown is, he's been a great coach. He's obviously won a national championship when he was at Texas. A lot of people thought that he underperformed when he was at Texas. He was out of the game for a while. He's come back and he's produced a couple of high round draft picks.
Sure.
In terms of the NFL, we know he can coach offense, but the fact that people are taking shots at his age is just like,
come on,
you can coach, you can coach. And I realize it's like, well, is he going to be there in 5 years and all that kind of stuff? But that shouldn't be your biggest selling point when you're trying to sell your program, is what's wrong with the other program.
And that's the key right there. Like, look, I know that, the recruiting that I've been doing with my kid, he's not a 5-star, or anything like that. Right. But every stop we've made, these coaches and these teams are pushing themselves, what they have to offer. Not once has another school come up in a negative fashion. Not one time. In fact, the only time another school was brought up was actually a praise. They're like, man, their facilities are awesome. You know what I mean? Like, so, and that was a coach that I know kind of outside of the recruiting game, but they never bring up other schools, and again, it's not like they're necessarily competing for my kids' services. It's more like the other way around. But at the same time, there are kids in the room when they're giving these presentations and they're talking about recruiting and they're doing all these things. They don't bring up other schools, man. Like, it is just,
that's good.
They're just bringing up what they have to offer. And I think that's the way you should do it. And again, maybe I'm naive. I'm not a 5-star recruit's dad where they're handing out money and they're doing all these different things.
Right.
So it's different there.
And the higher you go, the more pressure there is,
sure.
As we've seen with how some of the recruiting things that have happened around here in the last few weeks.
Right.
So,
yeah, I get it. I get it. It's just, it's sad. And I am dismayed that that's the case, but there's always been negative recruiting. It's just going after a guy's age. Like, come on, man. Like, yeah, you can go after a guy's, hey, well, he's not going to be there in 5 years either. It doesn't matter how old he is because he's going to jump from job to job to job. Like, I don't know. I just don't like the age thing personally.
Completely agree. 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Mack Brown. Yep. I love it.
Check.
All right, Vince, we're going to wrap it up with that. Fall training camp is beginning on Wednesday, so we can all be excited.
I will be focused on my family vacation, but with an eye towards Sean Steyer's texts. So
I'll see what I can get you. I'll see if I can set you up.
Appreciate it.
All right. Hit the like button, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. Again, training camp starts Wednesday, and we've got you covered here, both on our podcast platforms, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, irishbreakdown.com and the Champions Lounge. If you're not a subscriber to the Champions Lounge, what are you even doing? Get there now. It's a perfect time to do it. Subscribe to the Champions Lounge, our premium message board where you get all kinds of good intel on Notre Dame football and more throughout the year. All right, Vince, I will talk to you later. Hit that like button.